I became fascinated with Central Asia in high school. I grew up in Pakistan, which is not very far from here, but during the Cold War, it was a very different. Pakistan and Uzbekistan were very, very different in many ways, and that's how I began to wonder how that difference arose and what might the explanation be. And so that's how I initially got interested in Central Asia. And then, of course, everything changed. The Cold War was over, and it became possible to travel to Uzbekistan. And I would not have dreamed when I started that I'd be able to travel so easily to Uzbekistan.
And in your research, what kind of rose in terms of the significance of the Jadids on these ideas of national identity, statehood?
Well, so I so the Jadids I've been interested in from the very beginning. That was my doctoral dissertation. That became my first book. I was interested in that partly because the Jadids represent something a little bit bigger. I think all Muslim societies in the world grappled with these questions of how to how to articulate what. My goodness, you can cut that out. Yes, with these contradictions between their Islamic heritage and the needs of the moment, and of the questions of colonialism. Most Muslim societies were colonized. Central Asia was one. So was Pakistan, and Muslim intellectuals came up with. Tried to answer the question of what is to be done and how do you make sense of Islam and modernity and progress. So in that sense, that was my sort of first entry into that. And then the deeper I got into that, I realized that Jadidism was that and quite a bit more, and that the Jadids have a very important role in the articulation of modern national identities in Central Asia. And that has been the subject of pretty much most of my work.
And do you have any insights in how gender kind of was addressed within the Jadid movement?
So at various levels in the beginning, the Jadids were proponents of changing the position of women in society. I think a modern gender analysis of that would be a little different from what the Jadids themselves would have thought, but they were full proponents of the fact that women should have a rights to equal education, and then when it became possible to vote after the Russian Revolution, that they should play an important part in the political life of their society. Eventually, they were sort of outflanked, if you will, by a much more radical vision that the Soviets had, and that was part of the whole marginalization of the Jadids themselves.
And can you see that legacy of the Jadids still here in Uzbek society?
In some ways, yes, and in some ways, I think the question is, Jadidism arose in a very specific context of colonization and the struggle for modern education. And today, Uzbekistan is a sovereign state. Colonization is not an issue, nor is education. Uzbekistan has universal public education. So some of those questions don't apply. But I think the question of harmonizing Islam and modernity is still very much here. And I think there are significant numbers of intellectuals and people in general who find quite a bit of meaning in Jadidism.
I can see there's a lot of changes over the last few years in Uzbekistan. There's more women wearing hijabs. There's more people publicly displaying their Islam. How do you see that change now?
So the Jadids were not anti-Islamic in any way at all. They wanted to modernize Islam and make it congruent with the ideas of progress and modernity. So they were not ever really in favor, even after the revolution, of forced or mandatory unveiling. So I'm not sure they would have a very big problem with women wearing the hijab or Islam being in public life as long as it does not. It is a modernist and enlightened version of Islam.
And last question, what is the significance of this conference for you?
Oh, this is wonderful. It's amazing because when I started on my doctoral work, I was alone, and that was still before the independence of Uzbekistan, and it was not really all that easy to travel here. And then even after that, there were just a few people here and there who were interested in Jadidism. So to see this wonderful conference at this very prominent level that brings together scholars from around the world to discuss questions with, and also large numbers of Uzbek scholars who are interested in Jadidism. I think that's just a wonderful, wonderful thing.
I'm very happy to invite me for this conference. I represent Hungary in this conference and our organization, Hungarian Terem Foundation. Our organization occupies with the Turanian people unity, and therefore I'm very glad to invite for this conference, because Jadidism the same way which bring unity for the Turkic people and the Turanian people.
And what are you going to be presenting while you're here, if you are?
I will not presenting anything. I'm audience only, but because Hungary is the part of the Turkic states, we are very honored and we are appreciate to invited our country for this conference.
And do you see any of the Jadid legacies still carrying on?
Once more, please.
The Jadid legacy. Have you seen some of their teachings still here in the mosque?
Yeah, it has a huge legacy. I think because it's the most important to teach the people, teach our children about the modern progressive knowledge.
It runs from the romantic to the practical, and that I just said that 2024, inshallah, will be my 30th year of being engaged in Uzbekistan, and in the early 90s there was lots of talk about Kilajak. What is the future of our new republic? There was a lot of hope of what we would become, or what Uzbekistan would come, including me, because I, as a Peace Corps volunteer, deeply engaged in the future of Uzbekistan. We care about what happens here, and so now there's all of this experience behind us, and what do we do now? How do we reform what it is we had before? When you start a republic, you don't get a manual on how to run a republic. When you do reforms, you don't get a manual on how to do it. But we can be informed by the Jadids. It demonstrates not just to the world, and I really think Central Asia has struggled with this, demonstrating to the world, this is what we are, this is what we believe in, and give a set of beliefs that we can teach our children. And I think that a thoughtful person in the world will look at the ideas of the Jadids and say, you know what, that's not all that different than what we're trying to do in the United States. We have political debate going on about who we are, what we stand for, what we believe in, and this is just a natural process. But what I'm heartened by is the fact that you have leadership that is willing to take this first step, and it's a bold first step, and people can criticize it and people can be cynical about it. You try it, and so I think what they've done is really bold. And they've put themselves out there to have this sort of debate. I've always said that Ukan Kunlar, that I translated into English, it will be the measuring stick for the reforms today. And this is the standard. that we follow now. And this is the best articulated standard that I've seen in almost 30 years. You know, on the romantic side, I think that it's just sort of, this is the dream. This is what the Jadids died for in 1938. I don't think they had any illusions about the environment they were in. And you know, they had the same dreams and hopes and future. You know, the Tsarist Empire had come to an end. There was this revolution. There was this potential for change, you know, and to see those dashed by 1938. And that's not going to happen here. You know, we're too well informed. You know, we're you know, almost 100 years on from that. We have a century of experience behind us to inform us, to tell us, you know, how to move forward with the development of a republic. So on the romantic idea, I mean, I believe these men died for their ideas. I don't think that that's much up to debate, you know, and so. The term in Uzbek is majburiyat, is responsibility. It's our responsibility to thoughtfully carry on those ideas and have this type of dialogue.
Would you say this is kind of like the third wave of cultural reform or revolution Uzbekistan is going through?
That's, you know, yes, in many ways. I actually think that Uzbekistan is now, over the past 6 years, is really beginning to gain their feet. You know, again, nobody gets a manual on how to begin a republic, right? And no, you know, what's the Monty Python joke? No one plans on the Spanish Inquisition. Nobody plans on the fall apart of the Soviet Union, right? And, you know, so back then, you know, very much trying to figure out what now? You know, how do we feed ourselves? You know, it was very existential early on. But now you've got this level of experience. You know, and there's a much more public debate than I've ever seen in Uzbekistan, and so this is an ongoing process, and we're very much in a third wave. You know, I guess some call it the third Renaissance or whatever. Okay, but it is sort of this beginning of an efflorescence. Where people are engaged creatively better than I've ever seen them before, more openly than I've ever seen them before.
And they showed a video, and they juxtaposed the image of the Jadids then with the presidents, the current presidents of the Central Asian states. Would you say that they would be now considered the new Jadids?
Sure, why not? You know, you are what you believe in, right? We constantly juxtapose the founding fathers, the framers of the Constitution, with political leadership in the United States. That is our reference point. That is the reference point in which we argue over, right? What would the framers of the Constitution do, right? So, listen, if this is what they believe in and this is what they're openly supporting, you know, I know that the cynical would find something to say about that. But again, I come back at them and say, what do you know, do you want them to believe in nothing? You know, or do you want them to give you a historical reference point or an intellectual efflorescence that they could refer to themselves to that's going to hold them up to a standard? You know, when you're a demagogue, you know, you are the standard, right? You know, I'm not going to compare myself to anybody other than maybe Alexander the Great or Napoleon, right? If you're a totalitarian figure, right? You are the god in the room, you know. And what these guys are saying, respectfully to the presidents of those republics, you know, what these guys are saying is that this is our cultural reference point that we're going to gauge ourselves and judge ourselves by. I'm okay with that. You know, let's see what happens.
My name is Christopher Fort, and I am assistant professor in the Department of General Education at American University of Central Asia.
And what is the significance of today's event for you as a scholar?
So yeah, this is a nice moment for people to come together and share their work on Jadids, the newest things that they're doing. And it's particularly unique for me because, yeah, we do this in the United States all the time, but it's limited who attends and how. So it's limited to that English-speaking audience. I don't know many of those who work in Turkish. I don't really read. I read Turkish, but not that well. So yeah, it's good to hear from them and from others like that, since you have the little machine translation machines. Yeah.
And how did you kind of get acquainted with the Jadids, with this region?
So yeah, I think it started really as soon as I started taking Uzbek. They were they played a role within the curriculum, what we were learning, and yeah, we were even reading some of like the simpler texts that they did. Um, and then as I started to learn more, I started reading Uzbek novels, and two of the first that I read were Abdullah Qadri's Bygone Days and Chopin's Night and Day. And actually the latter one is one that I translated into English because, yeah, I read it in Uzbek, and it was the first one that I thought, this needs to be translated. So, yeah, I translated it.
And what drew you to want to translate it? Why did you think that this needs to be out there in a bigger audience?
It was really the poetry and prose that he uses, his humor, and this incredible parody that he has of other Jadid authors. So I'll be presenting on Hamza, who in the Soviet period was considered the kind of founder of Uzbek Soviet literature. But he was really a Jadid, and it was Komil Yashin, another playwright, who made him into this Soviet figure after he was killed in Shohi-Mardan. So it might have been serendipitous that he was killed in 1929 because he probably would have been executed by Stalin if he had not been.